Well, as we come to the end of the year, we want to share with you 7 2021 church predictions for next year.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. We're going to be giving you 7 predictions for the state of the church in 2021.
We've never done this before.
Yes.
So this is our first annual. What's going to happen next year?
There might be some hot takes.
So this will be our last episode of 2020.
Yeah.
So that's sad. But with that, if I could just take a brief second and ask you to do 2 things. If you like the podcast, we would really enjoy a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it. We think that this is unique in terms of it's not just like philosophical or theological, like it's really like, here's what you can do if you don't know what to do. And to our knowledge, there's not a lot of other resources like this in church planting. And I've had the honor of speaking to many of you this year, which has been great. And that's something that I've heard a lot. So we would really appreciate it if you could share or, review it, give it a, tell your friends about it, because that'll help more people engage with it.
Yep.
And the second thing is, if you're a part of the Practical Church Planting Facebook group, invite one ministry friend.
Just one.
Just one.
Double those numbers.
Because again, this might sound self-serving for us, but we really believe what we're doing, and I know a lot of you guys have been helped by it, and we want to help more people plant churches that thrive, especially in such a difficult season that we're in right now.
Yep.
So, rating and review, join the Practical Church Planting Facebook group. All right, last episode of the year. Are you ready?
Here it comes.
I don't know if any of these will work. I guess at the December of 2021, we can do next year's and recap this year's.
Oh, that'd be good.
So here we go. 7 predictions. What's going to happen next year? The first one is probably the most ambiguous, but it still makes sense. So just hang with me, okay? Here we go. Many churches will almost get back to pre-COVID numbers, but most of those numbers will be from new people. So you'll almost get back to we're kind of assuming with these that maybe by the summer-ish, COVID won't be gone, but it'll be a lot more normal, hopefully. So that's kind of with this. So that kind of, you have to give us a little slack on that one. But assuming that kind of happens, we think by next year, you'll have, I think some churches will be bigger than they were. But I think many churches, if they get through COVID and are still engaging their people well, will see their numbers return almost to normal. But it won't be from the people that have stopped coming and disengaging coming back. It will be from new people.
Yeah.
And we're in COVID right now, so we can only see this a little bit. What we have found is that most people that didn't come back within the first 2 to 3 months when we started gathering again, and again, all states are different, haven't come back at all.
Yep.
And haven't engaged much. Now, some of our people have, I think a small percentage are still actively engaged, even though they haven't done anything in person. But most are not. And I don't anticipate when COVID ends, they're just going to flip a switch and come back.
Yeah.
And so all that to say, don't expect, this is just our prediction, a lot of your people that are completely disengaged, even if they're online, but if they're completely disengaged, don't expect them to come back. However, I do think churches will get to almost their pre-COVID numbers, but it will be with new people, not with everybody coming back.
Yeah, I think that this is probably a little bit less of a hot take than maybe we were anticipating, because I feel like if your church was in existence, in other words, you didn't plant during COVID, but pre-COVID and going in, I think it's pretty universal. I mean, universal in the U.S. and stuff, not talking in the entire world, but that more new people are coming than people that are getting more comfortable and returning.
Yep.
That's just what I've seen from us and from others. And I think we all know that once COVID, quote unquote, ends, it's not really going to end. Like it's going to be whatever it is, manageable. I don't know what it's going to look like, but more than likely it's not just going to be one day. It's everything's up and gone. Yep. So it's going to take a while for people who are nervous to get less nervous and to come. And it's just going to take a long time. I mean, if ever, prayerfully, but I mean, for people just to break the habits of, or I guess create the habits is a better way to put it, of coming back to church. Like it's just this many months. I don't think at the beginning any of us were anticipating it being this long, and so we're hoping that we can just make our way through a few months and people wouldn't lose that habit. But it's been so long, and it's just going to be longer, that it's just going to be real tough for people to reform that habit.
Now, this prediction is my hope is to actually encourage you a little bit, because we see a lot of doom and gloom, churches 20, 30, 40%, which is us, like 30 to 40% pre-COVID, and people talking about how you got to engage people differently, which is true. But I do think that human beings are relational and social creatures, and that we do want to be together. Like people don't want to sit at home forever. They just don't. And so I do think people are going to go back to physical church. And we'll talk about different reasons for that as these other predictions. So I don't think you'll be stuck at 30% going forward, like some people say. But I think so. I hope that encourage you. But you got to keep doing what you're doing, and I think new people will join in because a lot of people are looking for hope. Partially depends on where you live. We have a lot of people that have moved during COVID. I mean, a lot of people moved to Raleigh, so that is a helpful thing for us that don't have community and they don't have friends. And you'll probably, even if you're not a big transient area, people are always moving. You're going to have people who are new to your area, who have no friends, who have no community and want that, even if they're not sure about the whole Jesus thing. So I think people will come back. It just might not be all of your people that left.
No, that's really good. And I was thinking the same thing. Like this, I don't know how you would, I don't know how you would meet people right now if you were new to an area and didn't know like the places to go. Like you can't, obviously some people are, but especially if you're new and don't know anybody, you're not going to really try and convince people to meet up with you if you don't know them and don't know their comfort level and things like that. So outside of church, I don't know many places that you would. So even if it's not because they are necessarily very interested in church, I think we'll see a lot of people that haven't really given church a chance come, even if it's just for the community aspect, which is great. Yeah.
So again, many, not all, but I think many churches, I don't know, have a percentage of it, will almost get back to pre-COVID numbers, but most of those numbers will be from new people if your people have engaged you in any way.
Yes.
So I don't know if that influences the things you want to try and do for next year. Again, we're not saying the people that don't come no longer matter, but you want to live on mission and not just try to like recreate the past for whatever that's worth.
Yeah.
Number 2, this is from our dear friend Brian and Josian.
Oh, here I am.
Churches with, I don't even know, I mistyped this. Churches will experience more engagement in their groups, so community groups, small groups, however you call them, than in their Sunday morning gatherings.
Yeah, I think that we'll see, I mean, hopefully they'll all get back to at least, I mean, like we said, to pre-COVID numbers, but I think we'll see groups starting to get back to that number before a Sunday morning will, because I think, I mean, we've seen it in my personal group and in the church that people are more comfortable in smaller gatherings, which is obvious, and than larger gatherings. And so I think, and obviously that's where deeper relationships are built and things like that than on Sunday mornings. So I think people will find that once their comfort level kind of gets a little, back to normal a little bit, I think people will miss their community groups.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but more than Sunday mornings, because there's that relationship and that kind of, especially if it's a group that's been in for a long time, that bond. And I think that with new people, like we were talking about, they're going to be more apt to, I guess it would go hand in hand, but more apt to join a group than before. So I think we'll see groups starting to grow, and then the Sunday mornings will kind of follow that growth.
And I think we've even experienced this in this. I mean, we're not a big church, so I don't want to make it seem like we've got tons and tons of new people every week, because we don't.
Right.
But even in COVID, we've had a handful, and even the last couple of weeks, we've had new people say, again, that they're new to the area or whatever, they're looking for relationships, which is, I think, is a vulnerable thing to say. Like, that's one of the first things people are saying now is essentially, I don't have friends.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying.
True.
And they're actually asking, like, on their first Sunday about groups, because they realize they need help.
Yeah.
Or they need relationships. And so we have over 200 episodes now, so I know we have a lot. I don't know how many we've done, but I know we've done at least 1, possibly 2 on how we do our community groups here at New City.
Yep.
So you have to like search through and see if you can find it.
Yeah. Back there.
But you want to have groups, and you want to have a structure, and you want to have a way of getting people plugged in, because that's what people are going to want at first. So.
Yeah, I would say that people are going to want that. I mean, with a new person, obviously they go hand in hand, but I think people would be more interested in that than just coming on Sunday, because like if they're new to the area or new to the church and don't have a lot of relationships, because it's kind of hard to build a relationship just on Sunday mornings if you're newer. Like obviously we can't always connect like we could before outside of Sunday mornings. Obviously there are ways to do it, but people are a little more hesitant or to do so. And so just on Sunday mornings, and then you wait till the next Sunday, and maybe you'll see the same people, maybe you won't, and maybe some new people will be there. It's just hard to build relationships just Sunday to Sunday.
Yep.
And so I think people really are anxious to kind of build those deeper relationships.
Yeah, so churches will experience more engagement in their groups than Sunday morning, especially at first. People are going to want to be a part of it. And so this is the struggle too if you're newer, but you want to like start to be proactive of when we're going to do groups, what it's going to look like. Even if you don't have them set up yet, if you're not sure with COVID, you want to have a plan. So for us, as a side note, we don't multiply our groups as a general rule. Like we cap them, and then we start new groups. And so what happens is if our groups get full, we will tell people if they sign up, oh, we don't, groups are full, but in January, in a couple months, when we do signups again, then they'll be open.
Yep.
And what that does is, I don't know if you've ever had this experience at a church where like you sign up and you don't get followed up with whatever. Like we're giving them a specific date and then we're actually following up with them. Like we're not asking them to. And so it's okay if you don't have it set up right away, but I would be thinking about when you're going to have them going. And so as these next couple of months or whatever, as people start coming back or people are looking for friendships or relationships, you have a plan for them. Saying I'm not sure just doesn't help.
Yeah.
So it's okay if you don't know, but say, the second week of January or the second week of February, they're launching again. Make sure you have their information somewhere where you can reach out to them, not just ask them to find you. But if you don't have a solution, start preparing for one so that when people sign up, even if it's not like they can't get plugged in right away, they know something's coming.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll add kind of in defense of this prediction or why I think it's going to come true is people, we've said this before, and I think most people that are leading churches would agree that church online isn't a replacement for in-person Sundays. That maybe for a time it's like a Band-Aid, but it's not a long-term solution or a replacement, or it's not the same thing. But however, I don't think, obviously we know that people that are home and watching online don't all necessarily agree. And so I think we'll see people that miss that in-person community of a community group or of a small group before they miss that Sunday morning. Because if people, rightfully, wrongfully so, whatever, people have gotten in the habit of watching on Sunday if they're still engaged online. And even though we would say it's not the same, I think a lot of people may get to the point where they kind of view that as their church.
Yep.
But at least what we do, we don't do any groups online. Really. We have a group online, but our groups like that are meeting, we don't have like half the people in person, half online kind of thing. We don't like mix it. And so those that we're in those groups, I think they're gonna miss that because there's no replacement for that right now.
Yep. There you go. So groups are important. They'll lead the way in engagement in 2021. Number 3, churches that invest in their live stream will see the most physical growth. Now, you kind of already saw this a little bit even pre-COVID. So people are like worried about the online thing because then people will stop coming.
Yeah.
And with COVID, I think that's just changed a lot of things, regardless of what your theological beliefs in terms of online church and that sort of thing. We, as Brian was saying, we don't think it's a replacement. It's a supplement at best. But I think given COVID, we want to do the best we can to reach people.
Yep.
So that being said, those who invest in their live stream, though, will, because people are still weary of coming back, and especially new people, if they can see something online before they come, it kind of takes a lot of the intimidation away. And we've even seen this now. People have also said like they've watched our stuff before they came.
Yeah.
Not just like looked at us online, but watched the service. Probably not the whole service, but they clicked through it.
Yeah.
And so if you invest in your live stream equipment, those people will see the most physical growth. Now, preface this by saying we know everyone has a different amount of money, but by invest we mean more than just your iPhone.
Yeah.
Like you're going to have to pay some money to do this well. So whether it's getting your cameras or figuring out all the things that Brian figured out for us, I don't know. But it's going to take some effort and some financial resources. Of course, it doesn't say you got to spend $500,000, but you're going to have to spend something. And again, your context, your size will dictate how much money you can spend. But like percentage of growth wise, if you're not spending any money on live stream other than just putting up your iPhone, I don't think it's not going to help you. We talked about this like a month or two ago about how in the beginning of COVID, the production level didn't really matter, and everyone was saying, "See, everybody loves the organic and the natural look."
Yep.
But that was because celebrities, people are interested in seeing what the celebrity's house looks like. They don't care about our houses.
Yeah.
And secondly, we saw this fall that all of the networks and studios were now getting back in person because the quality, the audio, the visual, everything is so much better. And so you're going to want to invest something. And it's going to look different for who that is. But if you just have your iPhone, it's not going to lead to physical growth. We think if you invest, it will actually lead to in-person attendance and engagement to go up.
Yeah, this isn't COVID specific, and this shouldn't be a surprise, hopefully, but people will obviously check you out online before they visit. And I would say 1,000,000 times more so now than before COVID, because as you're talking, I was just thinking, for example, in the past couple of days, there's 2 different churches I've looked up. One from where I'm from, which isn't Raleigh, and another one that's local, just because one of them, they launched, it's like an acquaintance that launched it. I didn't really follow their whole story, but they launched right around COVID, and I was trying to decipher if they had a space they met in before. And I just came to mind, I was trying to look up. But then the other one is a church that's in the town I live in, but I have no idea where they meet. So I was just curious. But if I'd looked them up and they weren't doing anything online or weren't doing any like live stream or anything like that, being that they're both in portable locations, I would have had no idea if they were meeting, or I mean, if they weren't actively engaging people online. So hopefully that's just a little sidebar, but hopefully that's not a shock to anybody by this point in COVID times. But yeah, it's just, I think that, I mean, I don't necessarily like this term very much, but I think people are just kind of COVID weary of things. And so the just in-home shots of things, I think that it was cool in the beginning. And I get budgets are tight. Like, this is not the time that anyone wants to dump a lot of money into anything, including us. Yeah. But it's just, this is, I think, a long-term investment that even once, hopefully, our predictions come true and things get a little bit back to normal next year, that you'll be able to use for the long run. This isn't just a COVID-specific purchase, which I think is a little bit more tough to justify. But this will be a long-term thing, and people, whether we like it or not, people are going to be more interested in watching a live stream of church for a longer period of time. And so we can say that's wrong all we want, and there's definitely arguments that it may be wrong, but I think doing at least something to engage people online is going to take a little bit of money and a little bit of investment.
And it's important, too, that it's not just COVID only, because that's part of the reason why we decided to invest in this, is like, this is going to be a very long-term thing. Because people for a long time, their habits, and they're just, I mean, even if there's a vaccine and whatever in the summer, the people are still going to be nervous for a while.
Totally.
And so that was part of the reason why we invested in it. Now, I think within the last 5 or 6 episodes, you don't have to scroll too much, we talk about our current live stream setup. Granted, it's not necessarily relevant, perhaps if you're just starting out, because of some of the things we can do you might not be able to do, but at least gives you an idea. So we talk about our setup, our cameras, the software that we use. But it's just, you're going to have to find somebody to help with something, because it's, we think that those that invest in the live stream will see the most physical growth in 2021.
And what I would say is, if right now you're iPhoning it from home, and even if you feel like your quality is pretty decent, which I'm sure some are, once you get back in person, if you're not and you want to live stream on a Sunday, that's just not something that's possible. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to be able to live stream now, but also once things get back to normal, we want to continue that quality, and we don't want it to be like things were great during COVID, which is weird, and then a drop off once we're in person. So even though what you're doing on a really low to no budget may be okay for now, you want to still be able to engage people online once you get back to normal. And so some of these solutions that we kind of can Band-Aid fix right now won't work in kind of the real world when we get back to normal.
So again, our hope is not to like make you feel super discouraged, like you don't know what to do, but our hope is that that we understand that you have to do something. You can't just say, I don't understand live stream. And like, again, our prediction is if you do that, just don't expect a lot of growth, which is fine, I guess, but just don't be frustrated. Because it's going to take some investment, and we think the churches that do that will see physical growth. That was number 3. Number 4, our next prediction is that you will not see many new families with young children until the fall of 2021. Now, again, this is partially just maybe our experience, and our experience can be different and that sort of thing. We haven't really seen any like new families.
Yeah, not consistent.
Yeah. But like even inconsistently, like 1 or 2.
Right.
And it was kind of a random thing.
Yeah.
Like, now part of it is just the demographics of our church, which are kind of weird. We've got a lot of singles and young marrieds with like no kids or one kid, and then empty nesters.
Right.
So it's just kind of interesting how we don't. But all that to be said, like we moved into a new location. We're closer to neighborhoods than we were before, and we're just not seeing new families, which again makes sense because you might have a parent or both parents who are nervous about COVID, and then you're putting them in an environment where they don't know people and they don't know how sanitary it is. And so I don't know how this impacts what you're doing or not doing, but I wouldn't expect to see a ton of new families until this thing is like a lot better than it is right now.
Yeah, under control. I don't think that's a huge shock, just because, I mean, we can, I guess I can only speak for North Carolina, but, most, I don't know if it's most, but a lot of kids aren't back in person school.
Yep.
And if you're not doing that, then the likelihood of you doing something else where you're dropping your kid off, like that, obviously you're not with your kid when they're dropped off to kids ministry, is just pretty unlikely. And so, until I would say, or I would bet that until wherever area, until schools get back to normal, till,
and when schools get back to normal, it's like for North Carolina, they're kind of going back and forth. We have like some in person and mostly online. Yeah. But this is like mostly, if not all, like in person.
Yeah, and like I wouldn't expect, unless they were already committed to the church. But for new people, I wouldn't expect new people to be coming with their kids until their kids, if this is the way they were before COVID, are back in person at school. because I feel like, I mean, I don't know. I don't even know if I would. I mean, I would, but like, I don't know if I would. But also, send my kids to school. But like, it'd be weird to say like they can't do anything else except for church, which is if you're nervous about COVID, I should say. So, yeah, I think that's I think that the trend of the church will sort of follow whatever your area is doing in regards to kids.
Yep. So I don't know how that impacts things that you're planning or doing. Like if you were a church that had tons of young kids, that might mean just thinking through like what are you going to do for the next 9-ish months?
Yeah.
If you're not going to see very many until the fall, when hopefully school is a lot more normalish than it is right now. I just don't think you'll see a lot of new families.
Yeah.
So.
I will add, this is like just something to think through. If you're a church that has a lot of younger kids, just something to think that are that are currently coming, like say you had a lot before and you still have them. Even though you're not getting any new, I would encourage you to think through what you're going to do with the ones you have, because right now there's very little to do with kids. Like there's just very little, like in our area specifically, there's just not much open. Obviously now parks are open, but for a while they're closed, and I'm sure in other places of the country they're still closed, and so I would encourage you to think of how you can engage the ones you have, but maybe not necessarily on things that are more outreach focused. Yeah.
So there you go. Probably not very many new families till fall of 2021. Number 5, churches that lack an outward community focus will continue to see a decline in giving. I think this was always kind of the case in churches that were more outward focused, not just about us, kind of made a bigger difference. But even now, communities are hurting, small businesses are hurting, people want to make a difference. And if your church comes across as we only care about us and our financial situation and making sure that we make it through, people probably aren't going to give as much. Like they want to make sure that their community matters. We already saw this like with the younger demographic, like a more social justice-ish bent.
Yeah.
Like whatever, can't speak. I think you'll just see this expanded more, that people want to know where they can make a difference. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't talk about your church's financial needs. Like we just did this past weekend, that we're in a tough spot because we moved into a bigger and more expensive building the week before COVID hit. So we're in a unique spot even among churches because our rent went way up. And this year has gone the exact opposite of what we thought. But even in how we're talking about that, it's not just like help New City survive. It's we want to get through this so that we can continue to impact our community and to love our community well. Now, people at our church understand that. Like we have a pretty good community that's pretty loving and pretty compassionate. So like they understand, like if you come to New City, we're going to care. So all that to say, you want people to give to your church, not just so your church can survive, but so that it can impact the community. But that being said, you also want to be doing things that are impacting the community.
Yeah, I think I was one that brought this up, and I have zero numbers to back this up. This is just a blind prediction, but I think I'm right. That I think once we come out of this, we're going to see that charitable giving to maybe not churches, but just things that are more social focused and community focused are going to see an uptick in giving, just because of I think people's compassion is going to be going up, and just when people can see their community hurting more than they maybe ever have. So I think that charitable giving in the long run, maybe not like in the immediate, but in the long run is going to have kind of an uptick. And I think churches can follow, but I don't think they necessarily will if they're not doing things in their community. So I think that, which is tough. Like I totally get that this isn't a time where most of us necessarily have money to be pouring back into the community or have money to be doing any extra things, and especially with the future being a little bit unsure. But I just think that right now, churches that aren't doing anything, and especially once we get into next year, churches that aren't doing anything that's giving back to the community in some way, whether it's financial or not, it's going to be a little bit tougher financially for them, I think.
That's right. So again, you'll continue to see decline in churches that lack a community focus. So, and again, you can even talk about giving to your church as impacting community, because hopefully your church does.
Totally.
But you can't couch it in, we just need to survive, because people, like a lot of things need to survive right now. You got to give people a reason to give to what you're trying to do.
And that's a really good point, just real quick, that there are a lot of, everyone's hearing the, whether it's from like nonprofits or churches or businesses, everyone's hearing that we just need to survive. Like, because everyone knows a business that's closing or something that's struggling. And so if that's all you're coming across is just help because we need help because we got to make it through, that's just, I think that's going to end up, I mean, hopefully some of your people are dedicated enough that they'll identify with it, but I do think that some of that's going to fall on deaf ears just because that's, unfortunately, such a common message right now.
That's true. So that's number 5. Number 6, Brian's got, I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but
I don't know either.
House churches will become more popular than they are now.
Yeah, this is talking like strictly the U.S., because obviously worldwide that's a different story. But in the U.S., obviously house church isn't the the norm. I would say, at least not in like our context. But I do think we'll see more of an uptick, and this kind of goes hand in hand with when we were talking about community groups. I just think people are going to be more likely to go to very small gatherings when they're getting more comfortable. When they're getting a little bit more comfortable, they're going to be looking for those smaller gatherings before the larger ones. And it's funny, like I think I'm a normal person when it comes to COVID. Like, I'm here clearly, but like, it's funny seeing huge gatherings on like TV, like things that recorded before before the pandemic. Like seeing like I was watching something, I forget what it was, some celebration of, I don't remember, like a World Series win or something like that. It was on the news, like it was on the news for some reason, and like people are like hugging in the streets, and even me, who's like, I don't really have a lot of problem with a lot of things. Even me, I was like, man, that seems so weird right now, So I just think people are going to be more likely to engage in things like that. And so I think we're going to see these little house churches sprouting up more than we maybe have in recent history.
Yep. Now, I think the challenge with this is that house churches, you have to somehow let people know that you exist.
True.
So I don't know how they do this. I agree that people want a smaller thing. And so I know we have some people that are part of the practical church planting community that are in the house church model. So it's just a matter of like letting people know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that, but people are going to be craving, which is what I think right now, there's a lot of difficulties with planning a church right now, but there's some advantages because people are looking for smaller gatherings.
True. And like, this being said, this isn't meant to say that house churches should become more prevalent than, churches with a building, or that one's better than the other. But I just think that we're going to see more people that are kind of that have been toying around maybe with this house church idea, that are just like, we need to pull the plug, that we need to pull the trigger and go with it. Yeah.
No, I think on the opposite side of this, one thing you need to consider though, because if you're thinking, well, we should just go ahead and plant because people want smaller gatherings. We talk about this, like what kind of church do you want your church to be? So if you want it to be a house church, then like this is encouraging for you. If you don't want it to be a house church, but you start with like kind of this house churchy language, and then later you kind of change your mind, even though your mind didn't change, you just like COVID went away. You run into problems. And so however you're like starting right now, just keep in mind to be thinking about the future and not just being like, well, people want a smaller gathering, so let's just meet in the house. And then if people like that and then you try to change it in the future, you get a problem. And so whatever you're doing, just make sure you're being clear that this is what we're actually wanting to do.
Yeah, it's good.
So, and then number 7, which kind of goes with this one, our last and final one, hopefully at least this one goes right. Of all these ones. And that is that smaller churches will see a higher percentage of growth than larger churches. Smaller churches will see a higher percentage of growth than larger churches, which is the opposite of what's kind of been happening the last, I don't know how many years. Typically, the larger churches are growing more and the smaller churches are declining. This isn't to say that if you're smaller, you're just going to grow, though. This is to say that those that are investing in live stream, are trying to make a difference in their community, are creating an environment where people feel like cared for and accepted, and they're smaller, they will grow at a higher percentage post-COVID than those that are larger for 2 reasons. One, because people are wary of larger gatherings, and that'll be like the last thing to go. But 2, people are looking for community. And generally speaking, though not always if you do a good job, but generally speaking, it's easier to find that at a smaller church, or at least people assume that. And so they'll go to seek out smaller churches first. And so if you're being intentional and you're kind of surviving and you're getting through the season, we do think that smaller churches will see a higher percentage of growth than larger churches. Again, going back to our first point, because most of the growth will be from new people who are looking for community.
Yeah, obviously what I'm about to say isn't a rule across the board, but I think in most cases, I mean, one of the advantages of smaller church, which I think most people know, is that you can care for your people a lot more, and you can build stronger relationships kind of one-on-one. And obviously there are small churches that do this really poorly, and there's a reason that some small churches stay small if that's not their intent. And there's some large churches who do this really great. So I'm not trying to say this is a rule across the board, but I think for the most part, it's much easier to form relationships with people in a smaller church setting. And that's what people have always wanted, but now that's what people want times a million. Like, so I just think that that these smaller churches are gonna see growth. And that doesn't necessarily mean like smaller churches are gonna now become the larger churches and that we're gonna see this like shift or whatever. But I do think that, like you said, smaller churches are gonna see a larger percentage, especially kind of in that early stages of post-COVID. Than the large churches.
And most of our listening audience is a church plant or a smaller church.
Yeah, true.
So hopefully this encourages you that you can. These things are things that you can do, and if you continue to try to be faithful now, we think that you'll see an encouraging difference in the future. But that doesn't make it any easier right now.
Totally.
But just like hang on, be faithful, work on some of these things, and I think you'll see some encouragement next year as people start to more actively try to get out of their house and get connected somewhere.
Yeah, it's that kind of weird catch-22 where the smaller churches right now are probably, I think are obviously the ones that are struggling the most because, especially if you're listening to this, because most likely you're newer and smaller. But in the long run, I think they're the ones that could, this is a terrible way to put it, but I think you get my point, could benefit the most.
Yeah.
But it's just making it through that time to get to that time. So it's kind of a catch-22 of I think they could see the biggest upswing, or the biggest upside, but also the biggest downside. Yep. So it's kind of finding that balance.
Yep. So those are 7 2021 predictions. You know, they say as long as you get like predictions right, you can be like, it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So we'll ignore the ones we don't get right.
That's right.
But next year we will highlight the ones that we got right.
Next year we're going to look back on our 21 predictions that we got right.
But yeah, so hey, thanks for being with us this year. I hope you really like it. Again, if you could give a rating and review so other people can find it. And if you're in the Facebook group, if you're not, join it. But if you're in it, invite just one friend. Because we think, what's happening here is helpful, and a lot of you guys, even in the group, are really helpful to one another. So.
Yep. And regarding the group, one thing I'll add, obviously, like we said, we don't think that virtual kind of relationships are should take the place of physical relationships. But right now, what we've seen is a lot of small groups or small church planters and things joining the group, and just have questions and stuff, which is a little bit harder to get answered than it would have been before. So I think that it's not just let's grow the numbers of the group, but I think it could really, really be helpful for your church planting buddy who may not have the relationships that maybe you did when you were planting a church. And I think those are a little harder to form right now.
And if you're listening to this and you don't have those relationships, this is how you can find them.
That's right.
So, hey, thanks for listening this week, and this year. We're really grateful to be doing this with you guys, praying for you guys. We hope you have a great Christmas. And this decade.
Isn't technically this 2020 the end of the decade?
Technically, this is the end of the decade, although people like to debate that. Well, it is the end of the decade.
Hey, thanks for joining us this decade.
And we'll be with you next decade.
That's right.
On Practical Church Planting.